The news ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Fatal injuries reported following violent clash in Gangnam district," and Dami stopped breathing. She had been sitting on her couch with a cup of tea going cold in her hands and her fourth unanswered note from him sitting on the coffee table in front of her when the words crawled across the television screen and something in her chest seized completely. Gangnam district. She knew that name. She had heard it in context but couldn't pinpoint exactly where. She grabbed her phone. Found Yuna's name. Dialed her number, just to check in. It rang twice. And then Yuna picked up, and the sound that came through that phone was not the Yuna she knew. It was the sound of someone who had been holding themselves together with both hands and had just run out of strength to keep holding. "Yuna, what's wrong?" Dami said while beginning to pace. "Yuna, what happened?"
Talk to me.
"I can't. Please come. Please just come." "Where are you?" A hospital name. A district. An address that Dami was already typing into her phone with one hand while putting on her coat with the other. She got there in 19 minutes. Yuna was in the private waiting area outside the ICU. Small, crumpled, mascara completely gone, hands shaking around a paper cup of something that had gone cold. She stood up the moment she saw Dami, and something in her just broke.
Completely.
Dami caught her. Both arms. She knew words at that point was completely useless. "Yama," Yuna managed against her shoulder. "They said she collapsed when she heard. They said her heart." "She's okay." Dami pulled back and held Yuna's face in both hands, steady, certain, even though her own heart was somewhere in her throat. "Look at me. Is she okay?" "They said she's stable. They said she'll be fine, but..." "Okay." Dami exhaled. "Okay.
Good.
That's good news." She looked back at Yuna. "Where is Jaewon?" Yuna's face crumpled all over again. Fresh tears. Immediate. The kind that had been waiting for exactly this question. She mustered the last of her strength, looked up at Dami's face, and said gently, "He's the reason Iyama is in this hospital right now." Her voice broke completely on the last word. Shattered into pieces right there, in that waiting room. Dami, he got hurt. He got really hurt. The floor did not move. But Dami felt it move. Suddenly, it felt like gravity was her worst enemy. Everything was a blur, and in a split second the whole world went silent. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. It all made sense. The suited men, the news, Yuna crying when Iyama's health wasn't in immediate danger, his absence at a time like this. And then, the flash of every second she wasted wondering whether she was ready to be a part of his life.
But now...
Was it too late? Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. In today's episode, we bring you impossible choices, dangerous secrets, the courage of a woman who ran toward the fire, and the moment silence finally breaks. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on new story drops. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far these amazing stories have traveled. Now hold on to your seats as we take a deep dive into this amazing story. 3 weeks before that hospital waiting room, Dami Grayson was sitting alone in her apartment surrounded by flowers and making herself very busy pretending she was fine. She was not fine, but she was functional, which was something. Enough for right now. The apartment she had been renting since she arrived in Seoul was a clean, modest space on the 14th floor with good light and a view of the city that had felt like a gift the first time she saw it. She had made it hers gradually, a throw here, a print there, her preferred candle filling the corners until it felt inhabited rather than just occupied. It no longer smelled like her candle. It smelled like a florist. White peonies on the kitchen counter, pale roses on the dining table, something with eucalyptus and baby's breath on the windowsill, and arrangement of flowers she couldn't name on the coffee table beside his notes, 4 of them now, folded in half, written in that small, deliberate handwriting that she had memorized without meaning to. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." And the 4th one, which had arrived that morning, and which she had not allowed herself to read more than once, which said simply, "The door is open whenever you are ready. No pressure. No timeline. Just know that I mean every word I have ever said to you." She had put it face down on the coffee table, smiling just a little. She had made tea. She had sat on the couch and looked at the city and told herself very firmly that she was thinking clearly and making a rational decision based on real information about her real life. Her real life, which did not include becoming the partner of a man who ran a criminal empire in Seoul, which did not include late-night phone calls with voices she was not supposed to hear and suited men at careful distances. She had a career. She had plans. She had spent 3 years rebuilding herself after the last person who had dismantled her without apology, and she was absolutely not, about to hand herself over to a situation that could do infinitely more damage than a man who said he had outgrown her. This was the rational argument. It was a very good argument. She picked up his fourth note. Read it again. The door is open whenever you are ready. She thought about the building steps, his shoulder against hers, the coffee shop and the rain on the window, and him saying you say the actual thing, most people talk around it. She thought about his hand over hers, warm, deliberate, unhurried, and the specific way her chest had felt in that moment. She put the note back down, picked up her phone, found his name. Her thumb hovered over the call button for 4 full seconds. Then she set the phone face down on the cushion beside her and looked back out at the city and told herself, not yet. You are not ready yet. The flowers sat around her in their quiet abundance, and Seoul blazed outside her window, completely indifferent to the fact that Dammy Grayson was sitting in the middle of the most beautiful argument she had ever lost and knew it and could not quite bring herself to admit it yet. Jae-won had not slept properly in 3 weeks. Not since the night she walked out of his mother's apartment with that and said ask me again in a few days and left him standing in a hallway holding the full weight of everything he had never said out loud to anyone. He had sent the flowers because it was the only language available to him that wasn't pressure. He was not going to call. He was not going to show up at her door. He had spent enough of his life watching people feel cornered by what he was. He was not going to add her to that list. So he sent flowers and he wrote notes and he gave her the space she needed, and he went about the business of running an empire with the particular focused discipline of a man who has learned to compartmentalize everything personal into a box and sit on the lid. The box was getting harder to sit on. He came to his mother on a Tuesday evening, found her in the kitchen doing something with her hands while her mind worked on something else entirely. He sat at the kitchen table where he had sat as a boy being told hard things, and he said, "What would Appa have done?" Madame Seo did not turn around immediately. She finished what she was doing, set her knife down, dried her hands. Then she turned and looked at her son with the full composed attention of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation and had already decided exactly what she was going to say. "Your father," she said carefully, "made every decision for the people he loved before they could make their own. He decided what they could handle, what they should know, what was too much for them."
She paused.
"You know how that ended." Jae-won was quiet. "You are not your father. You have spent your whole life making sure of that. Don't stop now. I don't know how to bring her into this world and keep her safe at the same time. That is not a question I can answer for you." She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table. "But I will tell you what I know. If you want to step down, if Dammy has made you want a different life, then step down. Build something new. Give her something clean to walk into." She held his gaze. "But if you stay in this life, if you choose to keep what you have built, then she deserves to know exactly what that means. Every part of it. No protection. No editing. The full truth. No more silence, Jae-won. You do not get to half love someone in a whole life." He looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he nodded.
Once.
The nod of a man who has just made a decision that will cost him something regardless of which direction it falls. He left that evening like someone who had stopped waiting and started deciding. He had 3 days before the decision was made for him in the worst possible way. The first sign had come 6 weeks ago. A meeting with Park Sung-jin, one of the senior figures in the Eastern Network, a man Jae-won had inherited from his father's era and kept in place out of strategic respect rather than genuine trust, had gone differently than expected. Not dramatically, not openly. A fraction too much comfort. A sentence delivered without the usual careful deference. Small things. Jae-won had noted them, but never acted on it. The second sign had come 2 weeks later. Whispers moving through the lower ranks about a meeting that had happened without his knowledge. Nothing confirmed. Nothing traceable. just the particular quality of silence that descends over men who are keeping something from the person above them. He had pulled 3 people in separately and asked direct questions. All 3 had told him nothing was happening. All 3 had been lying. He knew it. He could not yet prove it. And in his world, the distance between knowing and proving was the distance between stability and war. He had gone to his mother that Tuesday evening not because he was afraid, but because he needed to hear something true from someone who had no agenda. He had sat at that kitchen table and asked about his father, and she had given him the only answer that mattered. No more silence. You do not get to half love someone in a whole life. He had left that evening with a decision made. He was going to tell Dammy everything. Not the edited version. Not the carefully managed partial truth he had given to women before her who ultimately could not hold it. The full weight of it. His world, his life, his history, the thing he had built, and what it had cost, and what it continued to cost, and what it would ask of anyone who chose to stand beside him inside it. He was going to lay it all down in front of her and give her the choice his silence had never allowed her to make. He had given himself 3 days to find the right moment. He did not have 3 days. It started on a Thursday morning. Park Sung-jin requested an emergency meeting. Eastern District. A territorial dispute that required immediate attention. He framed it as urgent, as something that could not wait, as the kind of situation that demanded Jae-won's personal presence rather than a delegate. Jae-won looked at the message for a long moment. He thought about not going and what that would signal. In his world, not showing up was its own kind of message. He went. He brought 6 of his best men. He sat at the head of the table in that Eastern District location, and he listened to Park Sung-jin outline a territorial concern that was detailed and plausible and entirely fabricated, and he said the right things in the right register, and gave nothing away. And 3 blocks away while he was sitting in that room, his convoy was being taken apart with military precision. He found out via the 7th phone call in 4 minutes. He was already moving before the call connected. The scene that met him was controlled chaos. His men, securing the perimeter, accounting for casualties, managing the immediate threat. He was giving his 3rd set of instructions when one of his most trusted men, Kim, who had been with him for 11 years, grabbed his arm and shouted. Jae-won looked down. The fabric of his jacket on the left side was darker than it should have been. He was running on adrenaline, noted it, categorized it, set it aside. There was still work to do. 2 of his men were unaccounted for. Boss. I'm fine. Automatic. Immediate. The answer his body had been trained to give. You need to. Finish securing the east exit. His voice did not change. Did not waver. Then account for Shin and Park. Go. He gave 4 more instructions. Made 2 decisions. Ensured the situation was contained. Then his left side stopped cooperating with the rest of him, and he went like a man who has been holding something together through sheer will and has finally run out of will. Kim caught him before he hit the ground. The private medical facility was 40 minutes away, and he was conscious for approximately 20 of them, long enough to give Kim 3 specific instructions about what needed to happen in the next 12 hours to maintain stability in his absence, long enough to ensure the most critical decisions were delegated to the right people. Long enough to be the leader his world required him to be, even horizontal in the back of an armored vehicle with his jacket pressed against his side. He lost consciousness, somewhere on the expressway. He came back in a white room with his doctor standing over him, and Kim at the door, and the particular quality of silence that meant the situation had been contained, but was not over. How bad, he said. Internal bleeding. The doctor did not soften it. We need to go in tonight. There is also a possibility, depending on what we find, that a transplant may be necessary. We will not know until we are inside. Jae-won looked at the ceiling, processed it, nodded. Notify my family, he said. Make sure Yuna is with Iyama when she hears. She does not find out alone. The doctor nodded and left. Kim stayed, standing at the door with 11 years of loyalty in his posture and an expression he was working very hard to keep professional. Jae-won looked at him for a moment. I need you to do something for me, he said quietly. Anything. He thought about a woman on a 14th floor apartment surrounded by his flowers who had not called him back. He thought about everything he had decided to say to her. Every word he had been building the courage to finally speak out loud. He thought about his mother at that kitchen table telling him, no more silence, and the nod he had given her and the decision he had walked out of that kitchen carrying. He had waited too long. He had let the silence collect its debt after all. "There is a woman," he said, and then stopped. Because even now, even here, the words required something from him that did not come easily. Kim waited. "Make sure she is safe," Jae-won said finally. "Whatever happens tonight, make sure she is safe." Kim nodded once. The nod of a man who understands more than he has been told. Jae-won closed his eyes. And they took him into surgery. "Before we go any further, I need you to stop right here and tell me what you think, because this story just shifted into something else entirely, and I cannot be the only one feeling this." First, Dammy spent 3 weeks surrounded by his flowers, reading his notes, picking up that phone and putting it back down. She knew how she felt. She just wasn't ready to say it. But here's the question nobody wants to answer. If she had called him back sooner, if she had stopped delaying and shown up, do you think Jae-won would have been in that meeting at all? Or did her silence push him back into the only world that had never asked anything of his heart? And second, before they took him into surgery, with everything falling apart around him, with his empire in crisis and his body giving out, the one instruction he gave was not about his men or his enemies or the power struggle that put him there. He told Kim to make sure she was safe. A woman who had not called him back in 3 weeks. Does that single instruction tell you everything you need to know about where his heart truly was? Or was it too late for it to matter? Drop your answers below and tell me which city you are watching from. Then stay right here, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about the story. And trust me, you are not ready for what Dammy does next. Yama collapsed 40 minutes after Yuna told her. Yuna called the emergency line before her mother hit the floor. At this same moment across Seoul, Dammy had seen the incident on the news, was worried and dialed her best friend just to make sure she was all right. She had turned the television off, then turned it back on, then stood in the middle of her flower-filled apartment with her phone in her hand and his fourth note on the coffee table, and told herself she did not know if it was connected to him. Told herself she was not going to catastrophize. Told herself she was going to breathe and wait and not react. When Yuna spoke, the code went on in seconds. The keys were in her hand before she reached the door. She was in a taxi giving the hospital name in Korean she had learned from 14 months of living in the city before she had consciously registered that she had left the apartment. She did not look back. Yuna, who was warm and loud and the kind of person who filled rooms without trying, sitting crumpled in a plastic chair with a paper cup of something cold in both hands, looking like someone had reached inside her and removed the structural element that kept everything upright. She stood the moment she saw Dammy. And Dammy crossed the room in 4 steps and caught her before she had to ask for it. They stood like that for a long moment, Yuna's shoulders shaking, Dammy's arms holding, neither of them speaking because there was nothing to say, yet that was more useful than just this presence, warmth, the physical fact of not being alone. Then Dammy pulled back and held Yuna's face in both hands the way Yuna had held hers 6 weeks ago on a bedroom floor when the only thing either of them could do was stay. "Yama," Dammy said. "Steady. Tell me about Yama first. Is she stable?" Yuna nodded. Shaky but definite. They said her heart responded to the stress. She collapsed, but they got to her quickly. "She's conscious now. They said she'll be fine." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Dammy looked around the waiting area, at the suited men at careful distances near every exit. She looked back at Yuna. "Where is he?" she said. Not how is he, not what happened, just the location, just the most immediate thing. Yuna's face crumpled all over again. Fresh tears arriving with the specific devastation of someone who has been trying not to think about the answer to exactly this question. "He's not here. Dammy, he's in surgery right now. They said there might be." Her voice broke completely. "They said depending on what they find he might need a transplant." The word landed in the waiting room and stayed there. Dammy stood very still. She thought about the building steps, his shoulder against hers, the warmth of his hand over hers in that living room, and the way he had looked at her when he said not yet but soon. "I promise you soon." She thought about 4 weeks of flowers and 4 notes and a man who had found his voice and used it in the only way available to him while she stood 14 floors up telling herself she was thinking clearly. She thought about everything. And then she stopped thinking. "Take me to him," she said. Yuna looked at her, eyes red. expression somewhere between broken and something that was not quite hope but was in the neighborhood of it. Dammy? Yuna. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. Take me to him. A doctor appeared within 3 minutes. He looked at Yuna,
Then at Dammy.
then back at Yuna, with a question in his expression. She's family, Yuna said simply. The doctor accepted this without comment. He is still in surgery. We have been inside for approximately 2 hours. The internal bleeding was significant, but manageable. We have addressed the immediate threat. A pause. Measured. The question of the transplant is still being assessed. We will know more within the next hour. Yuna nodded. Processing. Holding. Dammy stood beside her and said, Is he going to be okay? Not a question exactly. More like a demand. The doctor looked at her for a moment. He is strong, he said carefully. And he is in the right hands. That is what I can tell you right now. It was not enough. It was all there was. Dammy sat in one of the chairs and Yuna sat beside her, and the men in dark clothing stood at their careful. Yuna fell asleep somewhere in the second hour, exhaustion taking over where adrenaline had been. Her head dropped onto Dammy's shoulder, and her breathing evened out, and Dammy sat very still so as not to disturb her, and looked at the window and thought. She thought about the woman she had been 3 weeks ago, sitting in her apartment with his flowers and his notes and all her careful, rational arguments lined up in a row like they were going to protect her from something. She thought about how certain she had been, how clear everything had seemed from that 14th floor distance. The career, the plans, the life she had constructed. All the very good reasons why this was impossible and inadvisable and too much. She looked around this room, at the men at the door, at Yuna asleep on her shoulder. Yuna, who had kept a secret to protect her brother and lost a piece of her best friendship in the process, and was now sitting in a waiting room in the middle of the night because the world her family lived in had done what it always eventually did. She thought about Madame Co asking after her son every time a nurse came into the room. She thought about him going into surgery, having given instructions to make sure she was safe. She did not yet know he had done that. She would find out later, from Kim. But sitting in that waiting room in the second hour, she did not need to know it to feel the shape of it. Because here was what 3 weeks of flowers and 4 notes and one man's patient, unhurried refusal to pressure her had told her, without a single direct conversation. He had never once made her feel like a problem to be managed. Every man before him, including the one she had cried about on Yuna's bedroom floor, had made her feel at some point like too much, too present, too certain, too herself. They had loved the version of her that was convenient and retreated from the version that was complete. Jaewon had looked at the complete version and sent flowers. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. She looked at the clock. 2 hours and 40 minutes. She looked at the window. And she made the decision or came to a realization. She had been circling for 3 weeks. She was not leaving. Not because she was naive about what his world was. Not because she had decided the danger didn't matter, or the complexity didn't exist, or the life she had built didn't mean anything. But because the alternative, walking away from this room, from this man, from the family that had held her when she had nothing to offer but her broken pieces, felt like a diminishment of herself that she was not willing to accept. She had come to Seoul to rebuild herself. She had not expected that the rebuilt version would be someone who stayed. But here she was.
Staying.
The doctor appeared in the doorway 3 hours and 12 minutes after they had arrived. Dammy woke Yuna gently, watched her surface from sleep with the immediate anxiety of someone who had not forgotten for a single second what they were waiting for even in unconsciousness. They stood together. The doctor looked at them both. And his expression, that professionally neutral expression that had given nothing away for 3 hours, shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. The surgery was successful, he said. The bleeding has been controlled. He is in recovery. He is stable. Yuna made a sound. It was not words. It was not crying exactly. It was something that started in her chest and came out without language, relief in its most physical form. Dammy stood very still. She felt it move through her. The same relief, the same physical release, but underneath it something else. Something quieter and more permanent. She had come running. He had made it through. Whatever came next, the conversations, the truth, The full weight of his world laid out in front of her with nothing edited and nothing managed. She would face it standing up. "Can we see him?" Yuna asked, voice still unsteady. "He is sedated," the doctor said. "He will not be conscious until morning." But yes. He looked between them. "You can see him." He looked smaller. That was the thing Dami had not prepared for. CO J1, who rearranged the spatial awareness of every room he entered, who carried that quiet authority like a second skin, who had looked at her across his mother's living room with eyes that missed nothing and gave nothing back, looked smaller in that hospital bed. Not diminished. Not broken. Just human. Completely, vulnerably, quietly human in a way that the controlled waking version of him worked very hard to keep private. Yuna stood on one side of the bed and took his hand and said something in Korean too soft for Dami to catch. Something that belonged only to the two of them, a sister and her brother in a language and a history that Dami was not part of and did not need to be. Dami stood on the other side. She looked at his face for a long moment, at the jaw that was always set and was now simply resting, at the hands that had carried her shopping and held hers on a living room couch and written 4 notes in small deliberate handwriting that she had memorized without meaning to. She reached out, and she put her hand over his.
Warm. Still.
Completely deliberate. The same way he had held hers. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say, yet that he was conscious enough to receive. But she stayed, hand over his, standing on her side of that bed, and let the staying be the sentence. Some stories begin with a meeting, with a look across a room, with the specific electricity of 2 people realizing simultaneously that something has just shifted. This one began in a hallway, with a woman who wasn't supposed to stop, stopping, with a man who wasn't supposed to feel anything, feeling everything, with a mother who saw what neither of them could see yet and decided, quietly, deliberately, with the particular authority of someone who has earned the right to know what love looks like, that silence had done enough damage in this family. Dami Grayson came to Seoul to rebuild herself. She did not expect to find someone worth building toward, but she stayed. And, in the end, that was the whole story. Share this story today, because these are the ones that deserve to travel. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. Because part 3 is coming, and I promise you, what happens when Jaewin opens his eyes and finds her sitting there will be worth every second of the wait. Don't miss it.